Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chiavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics, Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Heminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAoddsbreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5 Dime Sportsbook and Countermove, your home for fantasy MMA. I'm Brian Heminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts odds maker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC Fight Night 75 event, which takes place in Saitama, Japan. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. This will be our first episode without Reed Kuhn, who had to limit his role on the show due to a new job opportunity, although he'll still contribute articles on MMAoddsbreaker.com. Briefly looking back at our last event, our premium package bets for UFC 191 went 2-1 to profit 3.5 units overall. We won our bets on Corey Anderson and the under 2.5 rounds total in the Lineker-Rivera fight, and lost our play on Frank Mir. Our free bets also profited 1.38 units after going 1-1 overall. Back to the present, UFC Fight Night 75 will be aired on Fox Sports 1, Fox Sports 2 this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking off the preliminary card, we have a welterweight contest between Shinso Anzai, who is 8-2, taking on Roger Zapata, who is 4-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
Open the fight near pick'em. Anzai comes in the slight favorite, minus 130. The comeback on Zapata, minus 110. Right now, over at 5dimes.eu, our official sportsbook sponsor, it is Anzai minus 120. The comeback on Zapata, minus 110. So it went from a 40-cent line setting down to a 30-cent line setting, and more books have since went up. And it's about a pick'em across the board. And it'll probably remain that way for a little while now. Now, of course, lines are relatively fresh. They came out earlier today, so there will be more movement as we go. But as far as a matchup goes for this fight, it's probably a good fight to start things off with overall for the entire card, because it should be fairly exciting. If you've watched Anzai fight before, you know what kind of aggressive, crazy man he could be at times. I mean, that aggression obviously does him well. He wins most of those fights, and a lot of them are by knockout. That's the kind of fighter he is. But he's facing a very game and durable Zapata in this spot here. Zapata is a tough 19 vet. He obviously had some decent experience on the Ultimate Fighter show. He actually ended up making it to the semifinals, where he lost to Diego Lima by armbar. But he did have some success and some good spots on the show. Although there was a very controversial decision that he won to get to the semifinals over Ian Stevens. It really shouldn't have happened. He shouldn't have got the nod there, and he did. But that being said, Zapata stylistically is not going to be an easy fight for Anzai, because Zapata, what he's shown so far throughout his career is very good cardio, toughness, the ability to kind of keep a steady pace. He's not the easiest guy to take down on the floor either. So Zapata's a pretty well-rounded fighter. The problem with Zapata is he doesn't excel in any particular area. He's one of those guys who's just pretty good everywhere, but he doesn't dominate in any aspect of the game. But in this matchup with Anzai has good wrestling. He looks for takedowns, ground and pound at times as well, but he's just so aggressive on the feet that it's going to be dangerous for him. But I think if he can weather the early storm, Anzai does tend to gas in his fights. I think he's going to probably run out of steam eventually, and Zapata's probably going to end up catching him along the way or stealing a decision, maybe winning the last 2 out of 3 rounds. I know Anzai's debut, he actually looked okay. He ended up losing that fight, as he did gas out a little bit. He ended up getting caught to Mina in that original, and both fighters actually debut, but Anzai did take that fight on short notice. So you got to give him a little bit of leeway there, but at the same time, looking back throughout his career as well, he does tend to gas in fights and slow down. So even though he's going to have a full camp for this fight, I still expect him to slow down a little bit. So with all that being said, expecting a crazy good fight, exciting fight, but I think Zapata's going to hold on and probably get the W here, so I'm leaning his way.
Zapata hasn't fought since he appeared on The Ultimate Fighter, and his appearances weren't that great. Honestly, the fight where he looked the best was the one to get in the house, where he ended up picking up a TKO just by beating on his opponent with just a ton of punches. And that next fight, as Nick mentioned, it was probably one of the most controversial decisions in the history of The Ultimate Fighter. I mean, he clearly should have lost that decision. He was just getting out-wrestled and was landing a little bit on the feet before getting taken down, and he ended up winning a decision. Very controversial. And then when he faced Diego Lima in the semifinals, and he hurt him and then immediately got submitted the second he dove into Lima's guard. Zapata does not have much of a ground game whatsoever. He's pretty much all about the stand-up. He doesn't have a ton of pure knockout power, but he does have that good accumulative damage. And I do think he has some good instincts on the feet. He has decent footwork. He has good technique. He's actually a pretty good striker overall. And I think dropping down to the welterweight division should definitely help him there. Now, his problem, of course, is I don't think he's very good at defending submissions. I don't think his wrestling defense is great. So he could be in a little bit of trouble if he faces a really good grappler. Anzai is not a great grappler. He will occasionally look for the takedown if he gets rocked. But for the most part, Anzai wants to brawl. I mean, he has decent kicks, and Anzai really just likes to wade forward and trade haymakers. I mean, that UFC debut, he was just throwing heat constantly. I mean, wild, crazy, reckless, sloppy shots. And his defense is not good. Mina is not a great striker by any means. And Mina hurt him at least 4 or 5 times in that fight before he finally dropped him with an uppercut. I mean, Anzai has atrocious defense, does not have a very good chin. So if Zapata stays measured and calm and doesn't get suckered into a brawl, I think he's going to be in really good shape if this fight stays standing. As long as he doesn't hurt Anzai and then just drop into his guard and get submitted with an armbar like he did against Lima, I think he's going to be in good shape here, and I think he'll actually pick up the win. So my pick is going to be Roger Zapata. Now, moving on, we have a lightweight contest between Naoyuki Kotani, who is 33-12-7, versus Cajun Johnson, who is 20-12-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Johnson minus 270, the comeback on Kotani plus 190, and right now looking over at 5 times, it's minus 265 for Johnson. Kotani is plus 205. So again, line margins tightened up a little bit, line staying steady. I'm sure so we'll see a little bit of movement, but I think it will stay ballpark. I think the line's about right because honestly, Johnson does have several advantages over Kotani in this fight. Both these guys are veterans of the sport, been around a long time, both have fought experienced guys and have performed decent throughout their careers. Stylistically, obviously, Kotani is the type of guy that wants to get the fight to the floor. He wants to drop some ground and pound. He wants to look for the submission. He usually dominates opponents on the ground, depending on, of course, matchups. I don't think he's going to be able to do that with Johnson because Johnson is game on the ground as well. And then on the feet, of course, Johnson has a tremendous reach advantage in this fight. He is the better striker overall. The problem and question mark, of course, with Johnson is that chin. His chin is a huge concern. I mean, he gets his jaw broken in the past. Obviously, he has already in the UFC. So Johnson's chin is something that you have to be concerned about always, but lucky for him, Kotani, even though he has a little bit of power, I don't think he's a real threat to honestly knock Johnson out. I mean, you never know when your chin is that bad. At times, it doesn't take much, but I think we got to give Johnson again the benefit of the doubt, and I think he's going to be able to survive Kotani on the feet, and he'll probably end up having a lot of success on the feet actually as well. And then if it hits the ground, I think Johnson is very game. Even though that's Kotani's strength, I think Johnson will also give him some fits there on the ground. If he gets put on his back, I think he could reverse things and scramble out of position as well. So stylistically, even though Kotani is going to be game, and I think he will be able to be competitive in this fight somewhat, I think Johnson has a chance to possibly finish Kotani. Kotani is coming off of 2 back-to-back losses. One of them was by knockout. Of course, the last fight to Cabral was by submission, but I don't trust Kotani's chin that much either. And I do think that Johnson is the more dangerous, more capable striker. And I expect, honestly, along the way, he probably does finish Kotani. If not, I think Johnson will outpoint him as well. So it really is Johnson's fight to win or lose. And I think this is a good stylistic matchup for him. So hard not to pick Johnson in this fight.
Yeah, honestly, the only thing I disagree about is that this fight could be competitive. Kotani just has not looked that good at all in his UFC stint in either one, and especially more recently. I mean, he's just come in and he's gotten finished twice relatively quickly. Now, Cajun Johnson is a guy that has his faults, but really the major fault for him is that he doesn't have a great chin, that if you hit him with something really hard, you can put him out. That maybe you could break his jaw like on The Ultimate Fighter and Laprise. But, man, I don't see Kotani doing that. He's not much of a striker at all. He's a guy that looks to close the distance, get on top of you, and grind you out, maybe submit you, maybe pound you out on the ground. But, honestly, when I look at it, Cajun Johnson is the longer fighter and is the better ground fighter as well. I mean, he has good wrestling. He has good control. And I think Johnson has just as good a submission game. So I don't see any way that Kotani is going to be able to control this fight and win this fight. It's just a bad stylistic matchup, and he doesn't have the strength to take advantage of Johnson's weakness. What I really think is going to happen for the most part is when this fight stays standing, and I think it'll be standing for a decent amount, Johnson's just going to be picking Kotani apart with a jab. He has a really good jab, and I see him dancing around, playing the outside, landing that jab, bloodying up Kotani's nose, and then, occasionally coming in with a cross and then blasting him with that. Maybe he can knock him out, maybe not. But I definitely see Johnson being in control of this fight from start to finish, and I just don't see Kotani having any real advantages anywhere. So my pick is definitely going to be Cajun Johnson. Now, sticking in the lightweight division, we have Nick Hine, who is 12-2, taking on Yasuki Kasuya, who is 9-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Hine minus 280, the comeback on Kasuya plus 200. Right now it's minus 270 for Hine, and Kasuya is plus 210. So again, the same scenario so far with the first three fights. Line margins kind of tighten up a little bit, and two-way action steady coming in, nothing significant. And I think this line will probably say a little bit ballpark too. Hine is definitely getting some respect, and he deserves it. I mean, honestly, in his last few fights, he's done nothing but impress me. I mean, the guy's getting better fight by fight. He's definitely powerful. We know he's got a good judo background, so he's hard to take down to the ground as well. He keeps a high pace. There's a lot of good things to like about Hine right now in the lightweight division. He's no easy out. And if you're making your debut against a guy like Hine and your specialty is on the ground, you could be in some serious trouble here. And I think Kasuya, as far as matchup goes, he's going to struggle against Hine because of that factor alone. Kasuya is a very talented fighter. Definitely got to give him some respect, especially on the ground. He's a former Shudo rookie tournament champion, and that's an accomplishment in its own right as well. On the feet, he's a capable striker, but really, I mean, he's not going to have the advantage over Hine here as well. Kasuya has some speed. He has some decent footwork as well. Defensively, it is a little bit of a concern, and I think with Hine's power, he could give Kasuya a little bit of fits. But overall, he is a very talented prospect, and he does have a somewhat complete MMA game. But he does look for takedowns often, and as soon as he gets your back, he's the type of guy that automatically is immediately going for the submission. You don't have much of a chance to react or defend. That's how quick this guy pounces on submission. So Hine has to be careful in this fight, and that's what makes it a little bit dangerous, because even if Hine's winning the fight, I mean, if he gives up his back even for a moment, I mean, the fight could be over. Kasuya, especially with the rear naked choke, is very dangerous, very capable of submitting most. So that's the factor here. You're going to have your typical, basically experienced, savvy grappler in Kasuya that's tremendous at what he does, finishing fights on the ground against a guy that, even though he has some grappling ability, he's going to look to stand and bang and possibly do some damage on the feet. So I got to lean a little bit more towards Hine, because realistically it is his fight to win or lose. He should be able to keep the fight upright, and I think if he doesn't knock out Kasuya, he'll at least win a decision.
Kasuya is a very dangerous guy, but he has to close the distance. He has to be hunting for that submission. And I'm not sure he's going to be able to because of Nick Hine's elite judo skills. I mean, the guy is one of the better judo players in Germany. So, and he's come over and he's been able to stuff most takedowns. I mean, his defense is pretty good. Now, Kasuya, the biggest problem with him, honestly, is the fact that he gets hit a lot on the feet. His defense is not very good. He has been hurt on the feet. He's been dropped on the feet multiple times. He's not a terrible striker, but his defense is terrible. And if Nick Hine turns up the aggression a little bit, I can definitely see him putting Kasuya out. The big issue, of course, is if you turn up the aggression, you leave yourself open to a potential takedown, or just allowing Kasuya to close the distance. Because if Kasuya can get a hold of you, the guy is extremely aggressive. I mean, he has a good ground game and above, maybe even a great ground game. But the best thing about it is how aggressive he is. I mean, he will jump at a moment's notice on the slightest opening and go right after you. So I'm actually impressed with Kasuya's ground game. I just think this is a bad matchup for him here, because I don't see him being able to take Nick Hine down. And unless he's able to jump on something on the feet, like he did in one of his more recent fights where he jumped on an opponent's back, but unless he's able to do that standing, I don't see him being able to win this fight, because Nick Hine's going to control it. Nick Hine is probably going to be landing some good kicks from distance and some heavy punches. He does have some good power. He hurt James Vick in their fight too, so I can see Nick Hine winning this fight by stoppage. So I think Nick Hine controls this, and I expect him to walk away with either a decision or a TKO. Now, moving up to the welterweight division, we have Kaita Nakamura, who is 14-3-2, taking on Li Jingliang, who is 10-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I open Jingliang minus 210, the comeback on Nakamura plus 160, and right now it is Jingliang minus 225, the comeback on Nakamura plus 175. So a little bit more action is coming in on Jingliang. Not surprising again. I mean, Nakamura is another veteran. He's been on the MMA scene for a long time, an experienced, savvy vet, very accomplished fighter, a little bit underrated, to be honest with you as well. He did make a Zuffa run at one point early in his career. He didn't have that much success, obviously, in the UFC, and he got released. And then outside of the UFC, he continued to win. Most of his fights, at least. So the guy is definitely a talented fighter. He's getting to the point, though, in MMA years, he's getting up there a little bit. He's only 31 years of age, but at the same time, he's been through so many wars and against talented competition that he's a little bit beyond that in MMA years as well. So Jingliang is going to be a little bit younger, a little bit fresher. And stylistically, both these guys are similar fighters. Of course, Nakamura is more of a grappling-based fighter. That's what he excels at the most. Again, he looks for takedowns. Once on the ground, he's a very, very experienced, savvy grappler. He has good ground and pound. He looks to do some damage on the floor. He can also look to take your back and submit you. He's pretty good every aspect of the ground game, no doubt about it. So that's what his strength is. Now on the feet, he's not too bad. I mean, he throws some decent hands. He's a little bit long for the weight class as well. In fact, he's going to have about a 4-inch reach advantage, if I'm not mistaken, overall. But to me, I think Nakamura is just going to be a little bit outclassed here as far as power goes, and outsized a little bit as well. I mean, as far as, again, he has the reach, but I think Lee's going to be the stronger fighter. And when you have two guys that have similar skill sets and are talented fighters, the stronger fighter a lot of time is going to have the advantage. And I think that's what's going to come into play here. I do think that Lee has more of an advantage in his striking game for sure. I think his striking actually continues to improve, and I've been very impressed from what I've seen. How could you not be really with Lee? I know he's had very competitive decision with Talib, which actually is not that bad. I mean, he's improving. I think that arguably, he fights that fight again here soon. He wins that fight more times than not. And of course, he goes out there and just floors Diego Lima in his last fight, which was pretty impressive as well. I know Diego Lima doesn't have a great chin, but that being said, Lee is making some great improvements. On the ground, he has some decent wrestling. Now again, it's pure jiu-jitsu game, and I think his ground savvy isn't really to the point of Nakamura's, but I think he's good enough on the ground to survive and at least neutralize Nakamura. And it's going to be hard for Nakamura to get Lee to the ground, because even though he does excel at his takedown game, it's still going to be, I think, a difficult matchup for him to really prove it in this fight here. So basically what I think happens in this spot is that Lee neutralizes Nakamura, keeps the fight upright, and outpoints him. He might even possibly catch Nakamura on the feet as the fight goes. Nakamura is in this fight on short notice. So his conditioning has always been okay, but you never know. I mean, short notice fights definitely aren't the greatest thing, especially if you're backing somebody. So in this spot, I do think it's Lee's fight to win or lose. I do think it's going to be a competitive fight though as well. And part of me is actually pulling for Nakamura because I want to see him get a win here in the UFC. And if he doesn't get it this time, I'm sure the UFC is going to bring him back since he's stepping in on short notice, and hopefully he gets it next time. But I do lean a little bit more towards Lee. I think Lee's a talented fighter. He's impressing me, and he's going to continue to improve. So Lee is going to outstrike him and get the W here, I think.
Nakamura is actually a good fighter. He's had plenty of experience, and he was actually picked up a championship recently in the Deep promotion. I mean, he's a guy that's fought all around the world. He's actually fought in the UFC before. Granted, it was ages ago. I mean, literally like 2008 long ago. So, I mean, it's been a long time, but he's a guy that's a savvy vet. He's been around the block. He's picked up some good wins over that time. I mean, he beat Adriano Martins over in Dream early in Martin's career. The guy is just pretty well rounded. The big issue here is he's not really welterweight size. He's fought at lightweight for the majority of his career. I mean, he's fought a little bit more at welterweight recently, but against a guy like Li Jingliang, who is cutting a ton of weight to make the welterweight limit, he's going to be at a serious size disadvantage. I see Jingliang being able to bully him around the cage. Jingliang's definitely still a work in progress, but he has improved drastically since we saw him in his UFC debut. I mean, the guy has good wrestling. He clings to you like a leech, just like his nickname, when he gets inside. And his stand-up has actually improved drastically. I mean, it was, nothing when he first debuted. But his last fight, he was throwing counters, he was mixing it up, a lot of uppercuts, and he was able to press forward and clip Diego Lima and put him out with punches. So I'm not saying the guy is going to be, the next big thing, but he is definitely improving at a pretty impressive rate. So I'm thinking Jingliang should be able to continue to that development. And the biggest issue with Nakamura on top of the size is the fact that he's taking this fight on pretty short notice. So I just think he's going to have a lot of trouble here. Jingliang should be able to bully him. If it goes to the ground, he should be able to get on top position and ride him out without getting submitted. And on the feet, he's going to be the longer guy. And I think he can push the pace a little bit on the feet as well. So I think Nakamura is a good fighter. I think if he drops down to lightweight, he could pick up a win or two in the UFC, but I don't think he gets the win here. So my pick is going to be Li Jingliang. Now, kicking off the main card, we have Mizuto Hirota, who is 17-7 overall, taking on Teruto Ishihara, who is 7-2. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I open Hirota -245, the comeback on Ishihara +175. And right now it is Hirota -240, the comeback is +180. So basically staying again ballpark a little bit tighter as well on the lines, but a tough fight because you have another experienced veteran, Hirota. Of course, this is the road to UFC featherweight tournament final. So these guys obviously are on this card because they are the finalists here. So you got to give them both credit. Hirota, again, what I was getting into is he's a savvy vet. He's been around the sport for a long time. Of course, fought under the Zuffa banner and previously as well. And again, he's another guy that was already in the UFC and didn't have that much success, although he did have success throughout his career against solid competition. So he's looking for a little bit of redemption here, and he's got a chance against Ishihara. Ishihara, of course, is one of these younger, new generation fighters that's actually pretty good. He's just, in my opinion, if you look at the way he fights and the way his game is put together, it's not quite up to level for Hirota yet. But I think the guy can improve and continue to get better. And he made the championship. It was pretty close as far as competitive fights go along the way. He definitely had to sweat it out. It wasn't an easy road to get to the finals. You could say the same thing about Hirota as well. But the kid definitely deserved to get in this spot. And I think he's going to be even more prepared and he's going to look even better against Hirota in this spot as well. So I think he is fighting up a weight class, which is actually going to hurt him a little bit. He should be at 135, and of course this tournament is at 5. So even though he does match up decent with Hirota, because I think as far as stylistically goes, I mean, it should be a fun fight. Ishihara does have some pretty good striking. He's a little bit unorthodox at times, loves to flick out that jab and move around and then kind of follow up a little bit as well with some power, but he's not really a great striker, and he defensively leaves a lot of openings as well. His hands are always low. So that is a little bit of a concern, especially with a guy as talented as Hirota on the feet. But Ishihara does look for takedowns as well in his game. So he's a pretty complete fighter. But I do think overall, depending on, I guess, the fight and the situation, I think that his stand-up and the pace that he pushes is probably his best attribute. Now, in this fight with Hirota, though, he's the underdog for a reason because I honestly think Hirota is probably better in every aspect of the game. I think Hirota has a better wrestling game. He's going to be a little bit stronger. I think Hirota is the better striker overall. I do think he is getting a little bit older again. He's 34 years old and beyond that in MMA years as well. That seems to be a common trend here on this card. But that being said, realistically, Hirota should win this fight. He should win probably on the cards. He is the better fighter. He deserves to win. I think he's probably going to get the nod here.
Hirota's definitely the guy that's been around the block. He's faced a lot of really great fighters over the course of his career. And Ishihara, he's not quite at that level yet. Ishihara is a decent prospect. He trains out of Team Alpha Male Japan, well, for whatever that means, really. And he has faced a couple prospects over the course of his career, but he was defeated by both of them. They were both guys that are in the UFC right now, Tanaka and Sasaki, both good Japanese prospects. And Ishihara was not able to get past those tests. And while he is on the rise, Ishihara, definitely had some troubles in that road to the UFC tournament. And those fights were very, very close. They could have gone either way, honestly. And Hirota, he was a little more convincing in his performances. He was the most experienced fighter on the show, and he's performed like it. Now, Hirota hasn't been able to pick up a win in the UFC or Strikeforce or any of those major American promotions, but he's been competitive. I mean, he's had some close fights already, and I expect him to be able to get the better of Ishihara on the feet, even though Ishihara probably is going to be a little quicker And on the ground, I do see Hirota having a little bit better wrestling as well. Hirota is just a pretty good, well-rounded fighter. While he is getting a little bit up there in years, I think Ishihara is still a year or two away from being able to defeat somebody of Hirota's caliber. So I just think he's a little too inexperienced and young and not quite ready for this big step. I don't think Ishihara is really a UFC caliber fighter. I wouldn't be shocked if this is the only fight he gets in the UFC if he loses it. So I'm on Mizuta Hirota's side here, and I think he picks up either a decision win or potentially could pick up a submission at some point if he's able to get some dominant positions on the ground. So my pick is Mizuta Hirota. Now, dropping down to the featherweight division, we have Katsunori Kikuno, who is 23-7-2, taking on Diego Brandao, who is 23-10. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Brandao minus 210, the comeback on Kikuno plus 160, and right now it is Brandao minus 240, the comeback on Kikuno is plus 180, so a little bit more action coming in Brandao's way. Not really that surprised, because in most cases it seems like he is a popular guy to bet on amongst the bettors out there, the diehards. And he does have a great skill set as well. I mean, Brandao is a very talented fighter. He trains at a good camp. Of course, he's the Ultimate Fighter winner. He's got a lot of great things about him. I mean, the guy's dangerous on the feet. He has good wrestling. He's got a good jiu-jitsu game. He's a very complete fighter. The problem with Brandao, in my opinion, is mentally, you're just not sure where he's at. Physically, his cardio and his conditioning is not up to par at times. I mean, I know it's been a little bit more consistent, and you do see some improvements in those areas. So maybe you got to give him a little bit more benefit of the doubt than he showed, especially against that Elkins fight, because that was, I think, his worst performance as far as cardio goes. Since that time, he's been a little bit better. But that being said, again, mentally, I'm not sure where he's at sometimes. So for me, Kikuno is not going to be an easy fight for him. But it is a fight that he should win more times than not. Kikuno is a very savvy vet again, a very experienced fighter. He's a very well-rounded fighter. He's got that kind of unorthodox karate striking style. So he's a very technical striker. He's got a lot of power on the feet as well. But he's a sit and duck sometimes the way he moves. I think that Brandao will have some success against him, even on the feet, even though Kikuno is very strong there as well. Now Kikuno, of course, is coming off a couple knockout losses, but they were to much longer, taller fighters, and of course, pretty decent strikers with Ferguson and Souza as well that were able to knock out Kikuno. So he's not going to have that disadvantage as far as the reach disadvantage that he had in those two fights. But at the same time, he's also not going to be the more complete fighter like he was in the fight against Sam Cecilia that he ended up getting the nod at. So this is a very tough fight for Kikuno. I think it's a fight that he can be competitive at, and he can actually probably pull it off, especially as the fight goes in round 2 and round 3. If he can survive early on, I think he might make it interesting enough that he could steal a decision. But the problem is, I mean, Kikuno, again, he is getting a little bit older. He's 33 years old, but beyond that in fight years, again, he's had so many great fights throughout his career, and coming off of 2 out of 3 knockouts, in his last 3 fights, not a good situation for him. So I do think that I trust Brandao just a little bit more in this spot. My pick is going to be Brandao to get the win.
Diego Brandao should be just a little bit stronger everywhere. Maybe not in terms of pure technique on the feet, but Brandao's definitely going to be the aggressor standing, and Brandao is definitely going to be the aggressor if it goes to the ground. Brandao just overall is an extremely aggressive fighter. He pushes a high pace. He tries to knock your block off on the feet, and if that doesn't work, he tries to take you down and submit you. And for the most part, it works. It's just it doesn't work against the really high-level guys. I mean, when he faces top 15 fighters, he does run into some trouble. But against a guy like Kikuno, who is getting up there in age, has showcased that style where you stand sideways and just try to make some slight head movements to avoid your opponents. It doesn't work as well anymore. He's not able to get out of the way. He's been getting knocked out. He got knocked out by Tony Ferguson. He got knocked out by Kevin Souza in his most recent fight. So Diego Brandao doesn't have that crazy long reach like those guys do. But, I mean, he still is an explosive guy. He can get inside. He's younger, much younger than Kikuno. I expect him to be able to get inside and land those shots against Kikuno on the feet. And if it goes to the ground, Kikuno is a competent grappler. I mean, he has picked up a submission win in the UFC already, but Brandao should be the better grappler as well. I think Brandao has a little bit better wrestling too. Kikuno really has a kind of a puncher's chance here. I mean, Brandao doesn't have a great chin, although it's better than Kikuno's. And maybe Kikuno is able to keep some space with his kicks and, work a couple punches. Maybe Brandao walks into something, or maybe Brandao, gets exhausted, going all the way over to Japan to face a Japanese fighter. But I just don't think that's the case. Brandao gets good enough training and coaching from a high level, and he should be plenty prepared for this opportunity. So I expect Brandao to just outwork Kikuno over the course of 3 rounds, potentially get a decision, but most likely I expect him to get a stoppage. It could be a submission, could be a TKO. Would not surprise me either way, but my pick is Diego Brandao. Now, dropping down to the bantamweight division, we have Takeya Mizugaki, who is 29-2, taking on George Roop, who is 15-12-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Mizugaki minus 245, the comeback on Roop plus 175. And right now, looking over at 5 dimes, it is actually Mizugaki minus 240, the comeback on Roop plus 180. So again, another spot where lines tighten up a little bit. It seems to be steady out there. Seems to be fair. I mean, obviously, you got to respect both guys here. Mizugaki has been a very talented guy in, the bantamweight division now for a while. I mean, he's had a successful overall UFC career. I think he's been definitely one of the better Japanese fighters to make an impact on the sport and kind of make himself a contender and a guy that a lot of the bettors out there respect because of his well-rounded game as well. I mean, of course, the best part of that is his striking. He's a very precise striker. He's a very technical striker. He's got a little bit of zip on his punches as well. Not huge knockout power, but he's got enough to do some damage for sure. He's got a good underrated wrestling game. He's got good takedown defense. So Mizugaki is very hard to control, very hard to beat. I mean, if you got a really great submission game, of course, and you take his back, something like that, of course, it's possible to get him like that. And of course, it was a little bit surprising, even though it is a guy like Dominic Cruz, that he just got blown out in that fight with Cruz's comeback fight. So that was a little bit concerning, kind of a head scratcher. And then, of course, he fought a stud in his last fight, and he suffered a loss to rising prospect Sterling. So it is what it is. In this fight, of course, it's not. I mean, he's not facing Cruz. He's not facing Sterling. He's facing a game opponent in Roop. But it's a much more winnable fight for him. I think the Roop is definitely a guy that you can't really underestimate, though, because he's obviously has some talent as well. It's just with Roop, the main concern again is that chin. I mean, he's been knocked out 4 times in his career now. It's a little bit really scary if you're laying the juice against somebody that can strike it. Even if Mizugaki doesn't have crazy good knockout power, I think he's still capable of clipping Roop on the chin and putting him out. So that's a concern for Roop every time. But if his chin does hold up along the way, he's game. I mean, he's got good wrestling in his own right. You can say a lot of things I just said about Mizugaki with George Roop. He's got underrated wrestling. He's a very intelligent fighter. I mean, he definitely prepares well. You know what you're getting out of Roop. The problem is he's coming off a devastating knockout loss, and he hasn't really fought since. So he's been out for over a year, and Rob Font really put it on him as well. And I wasn't really shocked by that. I mean, it was one of those situations where Rob Font had enough power that you can kind of expect it, especially with that chin. So here, that's the big concern. I got to lean towards Mizugaki because realistically, I think he can outpoint Roop even if it does hit the scorecards, though it will be a lot more competitive than I think people realize. But if not, I mean, he could also finish Roop along the way. Now, can't underestimate Roop on the feet either. Of course, he's got some quality wins, surprising wins, on his resume along the way as well. So, Roop is going to be game. And I think that's why it's pretty fair spot where the line is currently at right now. But overall, I think you got to lean towards Mizugaki. I think he rebounds here and gets back to his winning ways. And unfortunately for Roop, I think he's going to suffer back-to-back losses.
George Roop is a guy that just hasn't quite ever been able to get on a roll. His biggest issue is, even though he is just massive for the division, he does not have a very good chin. He doesn't have very good defense. And when he gets caught, I mean, he goes down in a heap. It happened in that last fight against Rob Font. That was over a year ago. So I think that is a bit of an issue. Mizugaki has not been very active either. But, man, I think this fight could be a lot of trouble. I mean, Mizugaki, talk about getting run through the ringer. I mean, he faced Dominic Cruz and then Aljamain Sterling in back-to-back fights. So, he's on a losing streak. But at least it was against guys that were the elite of the elite in the bantamweight division. George Roop, he's not. I mean, he is a guy that can pull out surprises. I mean, you go back and he knocked out the Korean Zombie. I mean, that's obviously the big highlight of his career. But he's picked up decent wins along the way as well. And he's a guy that if he gets dragged to a decision, you don't know which way it's going to go. He can win decisions. His issue is he gets stopped in fights a lot as well. And I think Mizugaki is the type of fighter with that aggressive style that should be able to get inside and clip George Roop and potentially put him out. But George Roop has had that performance in the past against aggressive Asian fighters like Chan Sung Jung, where he can clip them and hurt them. I mean, he does have good power of his own. The big difference here is Roop does not have as good of a chin as Mizugaki, and Roop is not nearly as active as Mizugaki, at least in my opinion. And I don't think he's quite as accurate. So I expect Mizugaki to push the pace. So I expect this fight to be competitive. I think George Roop is going to eat a lot of big shots at some point and probably get put out by Mizugaki, but it would not surprise me one bit if George Roop somehow pulls off this upset. He does have a history of doing that. So I'm picking Mizugaki, but cautiously. Now dropping down to the flyweight division, we have Kyoji Horiguchi, who is 15-1, taking on Chico Camus, who is 14-6 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I've been Horiguchi minus 405, the comeback on Camus, plus 285. And right now, there is action coming in on the dog. It's now minus 325 for Horiguchi. The comeback on Camus is plus 250. So a little bit more support coming in on Camus. You know what? Man, I'll tell you what, he deserves that respect. I mean, honestly, he's been underrated again for a long time. Camus has. He's been working on his takedown defense. Of course, training with Rufus Sport, has a great team around him, good coaching, good way to improve your overall game. And one thing that Camus has always been also a little bit underrated about is his striking. The guy has excellent boxing, underrated power as well. He's got some speed. So he's got a pretty complete game. But the problem, again, for him here and why I opened him such a big underdog is that I believe Horiguchi is, he's legit. I mean, obviously the guy's still young. He's only 24 years old. He's already fought for the title. And even though Demetrius Johnson is just unbelievable, and Horiguchi was not ready for that fight, I thought Horiguchi would probably do okay. And he did not bad. I mean, considering that DJ's blown through everybody is what I'm saying. Compared to most fights, I mean, you got to give Horiguchi some respect and some credit because he hung in there, and made it interesting at least at times. But of course, Demetrius Johnson is Demetrius Johnson. So that being said, Horiguchi is a very talented guy, and at age 24, I think he's one of the best in the division already. So imagine in a few more years, with more experience, with him kind of growing into his own. I mean, he might actually be able to make the 125 weight class, but that being said, he's going to be a contender and an amazing fighter regardless of where he goes. So in the matchup with Camus, I think he's going to have the speed edge. Horiguchi is a very talented. He's got a little bit more pure power to go along with it too. So it's going to be hard for Camus to really utilize that good boxing that he does have. It's going to be hard to catch Horiguchi. And then as far as the wrestling goes, even though Camus actually had decent amount of success, a lot more success than people realized or they thought that he would have against somebody like Cejudo, I think Horiguchi is just a different style of a fighter. So he's going to have a little bit more success even than Cejudo did, I think, against Camus. So I expect Horiguchi to just kind of control the tempo of the fight. I expect him to be able to kind of dictate and get some takedowns here and there, even if it's not for long. I think Camus is going to be game and make it interesting. I think he can do that, and I think that he's going to at least win. Again, a very competitive but more clear decision. I think Camus is going to be game, and again, the judges, you can never trust them, so any competitive fight is always scary on the cards, but realistically, Horiguchi should win at least 2 out of 3 rounds, probably all 3. I don't expect him to really fade or slow down, and I think, again, he's just going to be the better fighter overall. So Camus is going to show up. He's going to be game, and he's going to come to win, and he deserves respect. So I can understand why some of the dog action coming in early, but overall, to be honest with you, I still got to go Horiguchi's way. It is tough to bet against a guy that's always underrated like Camus, but at the same time, I think that Horiguchi is the better fighter, so I'm going to pick him to win this fight.
The big issue in this fight is Chico Camus, while he's actually a very well-rounded fighter, good pretty much everywhere, Kyoji Horiguchi is better than him in every facet. I see Horiguchi being the quicker guy on the feet. I see him being the more accurate guy on the feet. I see him being the more active guy on the feet. He's the more technical striker. And I think he's got a little bit more pure punching power. And then in terms of the ground game, I see Horiguchi being a little bit better in the wrestling, a little bit better with submissions, and then just a little bit more explosive overall. I mean, there's just nothing here going for Chico Camus other than pure heart, blood, and guts. And that is the type of fighter he is. He's scrappy. He pushes a pace. He goes after you. But I don't see that going well for him. The only thing that I think could help Camus here is if he actually pulls back the aggression a little bit, because Horiguchi at times will rely way too much on being a counter striker. So if Camus sits back and makes Horiguchi come to him, maybe something can happen. But overall, I just see Horiguchi, really bouncing back in impressive fashion. I mean, they put him at this position on the card. He is the top Japanese fighter at the top of the card. After these next two fights are all, Americans and Gegard Mousasi and those guys. So I think they really want to showcase the talent of Horiguchi because he was thrown a little bit to the wolves in that last fight against Demetrius Johnson. He was still a fight or two away, but they just had such a dearth of title contenders in the flyweight division that they rushed him. And this is a guy that could get another shot down the line. I definitely expect him to get another title shot at some point in his career. And I think this is the first step on that comeback trail. And while Chico Camus is a good fighter, I just don't think he's up to Kyoji Horiguchi's caliber. And I expect Horiguchi to win whichever way he wants, and probably by decision because Camus is pretty tough. So my pick is going to be Kyoji Horiguchi. Now moving on to the co-main event of the evening, we have a middleweight contest between Gegard Mousasi, who is 37-5-2, and Uriah Hall, who is 12-5. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Mousasi minus 350, the comeback on Hall plus 250. And right now it is minus 450, the comeback on Hall is plus 360. So more action coming in towards Mousasi, of course. Hall's just a tough guy to figure out, especially at the betting window, man. I mean, of course, in this fight here against Mousasi, this is his first huge step up in competition. Mousasi gets a ton of respect. I mean, he's a title contender for a reason. The guy is a tremendous fighter. He's been around the sport for a long time. So that's why it's such a big step up in competition. I mean, arguably you could say Mousasi's better in every area in this fight than Hall, although Hall is a very talented, capable fighter. But the problem with Hall is he's had a lot of letdowns. I mean, he's got the potential to do really well in the sport. I mean, he's got the physical attributes. He's got decent coaching behind him as well. He's got some power. He's got athleticism, everything that you want to see in a fighter. It just, he doesn't push a high pace. He just kind of gets tentative at times. His fight IQ isn't that great at times either. So he has these decisions at times that are close and are sometimes lackluster fights, but other times he turns it up. I mean, and he looks great with it, getting some knockouts. Of course, the Ultimate Fighter show, for example, I mean, he was just running through that house. I mean, of course, it's a different level of competition, but still, I mean, you could tell the guy is definitely something to fear on the feet. And a lot of people were expecting it to actually translate well when he does get to the UFC. They were expecting better things from him. But that being said, he is a talented fighter, and he's capable of pulling off some upsets here and there. And this is definitely a huge line for a guy that has his potential and his ability. But that being said, I still got to lean a little bit towards Mousasi because I think even if Hall is able to maintain this fight upright and he strikes with Mousasi, I think he's going to have a hard time being that successful with Mousasi, although I do think he could be competitive, no doubt. And Mousasi has to be cautious because Hall does have some power. That being said, I think Mousasi on the ground is ahead of Hall as well. Now, I think Mousasi has underrated wrestling. He's been working for the last few years very hard on his wrestling, and it's paid dividends. I know against Jacare, he struggled a little bit in that fight, but outside of that fight, if you look at Mousasi, he's looked phenomenal in the wrestling aspect. And I think he can actually get Hall to the ground in this fight as well because Hall's takedown defense is solid, but at times he does get put on his back and he can be controlled. So I think if the situation arises and Mousasi has to look for a takedown, if he's not liking what he sees on the feet, he could probably do that. So realistically, Mousasi deserves to be a decent favorite in this fight. The line now going towards 500, I'm not sure. That might be a little bit too much, because I do think if it does hit the scorecards, another spot where it's probably going to be more competitive than all of us think. But realistically, Mousasi is a level above Hall right now for a reason. I mean, this is a big chance for Hall to prove to everybody that he does have the talent to eventually be a possible title contender. So this is a big win for him if he can pull it off. But I don't know. I'm going to have to see it to believe it type of thing here. And I think it is going to be too much for him. So I think Mousasi is going to probably win this fight more than likely by decision because Hall is a very tough guy. He's a hard guy to stop. So I think it probably does hit the scorecards. But man, there's going to be some serious power along the way. And Mousasi does have an underrated ground game as well. So you never know, but I think it's, Mousasi probably wins a close competitive decision.
Gegard Mousasi, Uriah Hall, two excellent strikers. Mousasi is definitely the more relaxed striker. Hall, he can get extremely violent, very dynamic in there. And I do think actually Hall has just as much power as Mousasi, if not more. And he can mix it up a little bit better. I mean, Mousasi can kick, but I mean, he usually focuses a little bit more on the boxing. And I expect Mousasi to be extremely competitive in there on the feet, but the big difference in this fight is actually the ground game. I mean, that wasn't the difference a long time ago, but Mousasi has really put in the work on his wrestling, and he's been able to get in there and just completely dominate with his wrestling against everybody recently except Jacare. So if Uriah Hall is actually getting anything going on the feet, and he might, he's a competent striker, and he is a very powerful, dangerous guy. If that happens, I expect Gegard Mousasi to just duck a punch or a kick and then take him down. I think that's also going to take away some of Uriah Hall's kicking game, which is one of his biggest advantages in this fight. So I think Mousasi does use that wrestling. I think he gets him to the ground, and Mousasi's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is light years ahead of Uriah Hall's. Hall is definitely more on the defensive side of things, and I don't see him being able to get anything going on the ground if Mousasi is able to get in a dominant position. And I expect Mousasi to probably pick up a submission along the way. But if it does stay standing, Hall will have a puncher's chance. I mean, he's a guy that has fought down to the level of competition repeatedly throughout his career. And this is an opportunity for him to fight up to the level of competition. I mean, this is definitely the best guy he's fought in the UFC. I mean, he did fight Chris Weidman back in the day before that, before he ever got to the UFC. But, I mean, inside the UFC octagon, this is by far his toughest test. And he's taking it on short notice, although he is getting about a full month to prepare. And he is coming off of a very, very impressive first-round stoppage over Alawal Bangbose. So I expect Uriah Hall to come in prepared and confident, but I think Gegard Mousasi is going to be a bit too much for him. So my pick is going to be Gegard Mousasi, and I expect he wins relatively convincingly, especially because of the well-roundedness of his game. Now moving on to the main event of the evening, we have a heavyweight contest between Josh Barnett, who is 33-7, and Roy Big Country Nelson, who is 21-11. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how has the public shifted things so far?
I opened Barnett minus 210, the comeback on Nelson plus 160, and right now it is minus 260 for Barnett. The comeback on Nelson is plus 220. So more action coming in for Josh Barnett, and he is the better fighter for sure, no doubt about it in my mind. I know that Nelson's actually a pretty well-rounded fighter in his own right. He even has a jiu-jitsu game that really has been in the UFC non-existent at times throughout his career, and he's known for knocking people out. That's what Nelson does best, but he is a pretty complete fighter, has a little bit of wrestling, has a jiu-jitsu game, but of course his main thing is knocking everybody out, and you got to respect that because he's more than capable of doing it, as we all know, especially early on in fights. But that's the thing here. I think Barnett is the better fighter everywhere. I think he's the better striker, the more pure striker. Now, of course, Nelson is the more dangerous striker, even though Barnett is a very smart fighter, has a little bit of power in his own right, especially in the clinch. I do like that he's smart enough to kind of put his opponents up against the cage at times, control and start unloading punches. I mean, it didn't work out so well against Travis Brown for him, but in most cases, Barnett does pretty good with that. And, of course, his best attribute is honestly on the ground as well. I mean, he has throughout his whole career shown that his catch wrestling style is amazing. Really for MMA, works well. He submitted a lot of opponents. I mean, it's just unique the way he goes about his ground game and his submission. So overall, Barnett has been an amazing fighter, underrated heavyweight throughout his career, a former champion, of course, in different organizations. So he's somebody to be respected. And even though he's getting up there in age, 37, I mean, you got to look at Nelson too. He's 39. So both these guys are basically, towards the end of their careers, let's be honest here. And this is an important fight for either guy. Of course, Nelson, I think, almost needs to get the win a little bit more than Barnett does, even though Barnett's coming off of a loss, because Nelson has lost a couple back-to-back fights now, and he's lost, I believe, 4 out of his last 5. So he needs to get a win here and put another little streak going so he could stay relevant, I think. I mean, he's always going to get the respect from the diehard fans. But that being said, I mean, if he wants to have an impact at all in the heavyweight division, he needs to get that W. And I think Barnett could probably get away with losing another fight, even though it's not a good thing necessarily for him. I guess it's more important for Nelson to get the W here than it is Barnett. But that being said, I don't think he's going to get it. I think Barnett probably will weather the early storm. And then in round 2 and round 3, I mean, if you look at it throughout his whole career, Nelson has not won a decision in the UFC, and it's not going to change against Barnett. Barnett's a smart enough fighter. He'll push the pace when he has to as well. And it's going to be hard to finish Nelson in this fight, especially because it's even hard to submit Nelson. So Barnett probably will have some success and maybe do some damage along the way, especially in round 2 and round 3, but it's still going to be difficult, I think, to get that finish. But I think he is going to win the fight, especially if he can survive early on. So you got to be cautious. Those of you that want to bet Barnett, because Nelson can obviously end things with one punch against most heavyweights. But in this fight, if he doesn't do that, Barnett's going to obviously get the W here. He's just the better, more complete fighter. And I kind of do want him to get the W, even though it is important for Nelson to get this win and to stay relevant in the UFC. So my official pick is Barnett. I think he's a very talented fighter, and I'm looking forward to this fight. It should be fireworks.
I'm hoping that the end result is a little bit better than the Frank Mir-Andrei Arlovsky fight that people were hyping up. But this time around, I'm expecting something real crazy to happen. I mean, Josh Barnett's a guy that will get in your face and try to put you away like he did against Frank Mir, or he can get guys to the ground and work that elite catch wrestling ability and get submissions. I don't see him submitting Roy Nelson, but I can see him potentially using that, top-notch wrestling that he has. And Roy Nelson, on the other hand, he's pretty much become a one-trick pony. I mean, occasionally he'll hang on to you and kind of think about a takedown along the fence, hunched over. But more than anything, he's usually just trying to save some energy so that he can leap in and land that huge right hand of his. Roy Nelson has massive power in the right hand, and pretty much if he doesn't knock you out, he loses. In his UFC career so far, all 6 of his wins inside the octagon have been by knockout. Anytime he doesn't knock you out, he loses. Most of the time it's been by decision, but he did get put away by Mark Hunt recently in the last year. So I think it can get a bit tricky here for Roy Nelson. I mean, he's a guy that has relied on a tremendous ability to take punishment and then trying to wing that big shot. And against guys that are more technical strikers than him, he's had a lot of issues. Now, I don't know if Josh Barnett is actually a more technical striker than him. He's more of that burly brawler that tries to punish you on the inside. He's never really been a great guy at distance. So maybe on the feet, Roy Nelson surprisingly could have the striking advantage here. It just all depends on if he can connect that big shot, because Josh Barnett has been knocked unconscious before. He's been put out by Travis Brown inside the UFC. But against somebody like Roy Nelson, maybe Barnett's going to play it a little smarter. I mean, we've seen guys come in with game plans against Roy Nelson, and they've worked. Alistair Overeem was able to stay away from that right hand. He was able to circle away and pick him apart. And guys like Stipe Miocic was able to use good footwork and just style on him on the feet, really take the fight to him. And then multiple guys throughout Roy Nelson's career. So this will be an interesting test for Barnett, because he's not quite that level of striker. So if he does get stuck standing with Roy Nelson, he could potentially get in trouble. It just all depends on if Roy Nelson can land that one big bomb, because Nelson doesn't present much in terms of kicking power, damage from kicks. His left hand isn't anything that special. So it's all about avoiding that one big shot, and sometimes you just can't do it. So Barnett is a good veteran, and maybe he can drag this fight to the ground. I don't see him submitting Roy Nelson, but he could control Roy. Roy has been has had occasional issues with getting back to his feet if he does get taken down by a real strong, powerful guy. So maybe Josh Barnett can do that. I think this fight's a lot closer than people are giving it credit for. I do not see Josh Barnett running away with this. So I'm picking Barnett, but I'm very cautious about it because, there's 5 rounds and Roy Nelson does have a lot of power, and he could potentially put Barnett away if he clips him at any point in this fight. So I think it's going to be close. It could get ugly at times, or this could be crazy exciting. I mean, really don't know what game plan Josh Barnett's going to have here. But I'm going to pick Barnett to use that well-roundedness to find a way. And I think Roy Nelson probably doesn't land that big bomb of his. So I'm going to pick Josh Barnett. So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC Fight Night 75. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out this Friday night following the weigh-ins. So stay tuned for that if you're an MMA Oddsbreaker Premium member. Also, if you'd like to become a Premium member, just go to the MMA Oddsbreaker homepage and you can sign up on the top right corner for either ours or Mike James's premium bets. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at MMAOB Premium on Twitter, because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email alert if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsbreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Special thanks to our sponsors, 5 Dimes Sportsbook and Countermove. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.